Hey everybody, Ben here from Cinderblock Studios, and welcome back to another acrylic painting tutorial. Today, we're painting bricks. So last year I did this painting called I Can Read the Writing on the Wall. Now this particular painting I decided that I wanted to create sort of this little arching bridge, and I did that by sort of creating what looks like sort of big stone blocks. I actually found this little technique that I kind of came up with on the fly pretty effective for doing so. So today we're basically going to be looking at that technique step by step by step, so you can very easily create really effective looking sort of stone block bricks for your next piece. Plus the cool thing here is that while I do a lot of landscape stuff, this can be implemented really in a variety of different art subject matter. You can do something that's strictly more architectural this way, or it can be sort of a backdrop to a figure. I think it's a really great way to add a new style element to your piece. So let's get started. Okay, so let's start things off today with our materials. There's a lot of them today. I want to get through this as quickly as possible, but guys know me, you never know. If you want to skip ahead to the next part of this tutorial, just going right into the painting section, go ahead and click the time code in the description box below. So, of course, with any good painting, you need canvas. And with this technique, you kind of need canvas in particular. It's going to be a little harder to do this on a smoother surface like wood. At least that's what I've found. So I've got a piece of primed canvas, which I've stapled down to a piece of wood to mimic the sort of look and feel of a canvas board. As always, I've got a little bit of water on the side. Not quite as much water needed for this one, so probably won't be dipping into it too much. Now, our main colors for this tutorial is going to be sort of grays, more or less. So I've got some regular Studio Black, which is a mix of Mars and Ivory Black, Titanium White. I've got a little bit of Titanium Buff, or Titan Buff, as Golden calls it. Also, unbleached titanium is how it's referred to as a couple other manufacturers. Now, I'm going to be using sort of a base gray to start with. For that, I have my used paint mix, which is just like every color scraped off and thrown into a jar at the end of a painting. It's this sort of cool gray. It leans a little bit green, but I think a good substitute for this, if you don't have a jar of used paint lying around that looks really specific to this color, some Payne's Gray would work really well as well. Or if you don't have Payne's Gray, just mix a white and a black neutral gray. And then from there, just add a little bit of like a blue and a green to kind of get you close to what this is. Additionally, I'm going to be laying down sort of a base color, which most of that's going to get covered up. But for that, I just have three unique primaries: cerulean blue chromium, Indian yellow hue, and cadmium red medium. So I'm just going to be using these relatively sparingly in a really washy layer at first. And again, you won't see them, so it doesn't really matter which colors you use as that washy base layer, provided you just use some colors. But those are the ones I'll be using today. I'm also going to be utilizing a gray paint marker. Now, you don't have to use a paint marker. That's just what I found works the best for me. You can just thin out some paint and do it with a brush. Or if you have, I don't usually suggest this, but a Sharpie marker, that'll work as well too. Really any kind of marker, provided it's not maybe like an alcohol-based marker like a Copic or something like that. So you're just looking for something that's going to lay down a nice, clean, even line on your canvas. The final major sort of paint tool I'm using today is some acrylic glazing liquid. Now, you almost never see me using this stuff. The only two places I really use it are when I'm doing water, and of course when I'm doing rocks like this, because I really want to get some fine detail, but keep the paint relatively fluid and wet. So I'm going to be using this. Now again, don't have it, that's fine. You can actually just use water, but I find that a lot of artists are using this these days instead of mixing with water, which is why we're not using a lot of water today. We're going to be primarily focusing on this. And finally, of course, you're going to need some brushes today. Just need two, or probably only one, really. This is just to give us, again, our washy layer. So I'm using a relatively small bright. This is just going to give us a nice, quick covering base coat. And I just have, again, a relatively small flat. Actually, this is a very small flat. I mean, we're talking, I don't know, what is that, 1/4 of an inch, maybe? So half a centimeter? I don't know.
something like that. So yeah, relatively small, and the whole process of this is detailing. You're not going to be doing a ton of stuff all at once. The whole point is that you take it a little bit at a time. So that's why we're using small brushes today. As always with a big tutorial like this, you're going to be seeing the my actual palette in a separate video in the lower right hand corner of your screen. And really at this point it's just to kind of keep everything nice and separate and make sure that you're seeing a nice big area of the painting itself. So again, palette will be off to the side here. And so yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and start laying out some colors. I'm just going to cut ahead at this point. That way everything will be laid out, and we can just go ahead and get started from there. Okay, so to start things off, I'm just going to go right in with the paint marker as a starter. Now again, you can thin out some paint and make it thin and liquidy. You can use a softer bodied paint, or you can even go as far as using something that I've actually been using with this technique a lot, some Golden High Flow. This is a super thin, low viscosity paint, sort of in the same consistency of ink. And as a sort of future tip to this, now I'm using heavy body black and white today. However, I actually find that using a high flow in the black and white for this technique works really, really well. I decided not to do that today because honestly, with this amount of colors on my palette today, you guys don't need to be buying anything else. I want to map out a section here. I want to work a little bit larger than my original demo for this. So, actually, yeah, okay. So we're just going to go nice head on. And we're not looking for super accurate lines at this point. We're just looking for general lines. Just kind of map out where I want those bricks to be. Now, if you've ever worked with bricks or stone blocks or whatever they are, you know that they're not stacked one on top of the other because that wouldn't make a very good wall. You stagger them. So you stagger your lines as well. Put the indications of some other ones up here as well, I think. Right about like that. And again, we're just sketching that out. Now, I should make note that in your particular piece, not every brick wall is going to be face on like this. You're going to be looking into things like basic single and 2-point perspective. So if you're doing something like that, make sure that you're keeping your lines heading towards your horizon line. If that is indeed sort of the method you're going for, so something like a 2-point. Something like that really kind of maps out that area. Make sure your lines are leading where you want the viewer's eye to look, so whether that be single point perspective, 2-point. But in today's example, we're just going to keep it simple and do simple face on, facing the brick wall. Now we may need the paint marker again, so I'm going to hold off on putting that away for the time being. And for now, we're just going to go ahead and start laying in a base color. Now, when I say a base color at this point, I'm just going to be trying to more or less cover up the white. I'm going to get the paint really, really thin. It's a lot of water. Not touching the glazing liquid yet, don't need to. I'm going to basically be mixing more or less a chromatic gray with these colors. Maybe leaning a little bit greener or browner, I'm not really sure. Again, with a process like this, I would probably be using my high flows. I have a couple other colors with that, but we're keeping it relatively simple today. I'm going to add a little bit of funny gray in there too. Why not? And then really water that down, making it just really kind of nasty looking. Actually, that's really similar to that gray. So I'm going to get a little more blue into it, I think. All right. So from here, generally speaking, you don't want to cover up these grout lines. We want to kind of work around them for the time being. And again, you can use whatever colors you want here. I find that depending on how you want your bricks to look, it's going to depend on how transparent we make the upper layers of this. And if there's some white space in between here, that's all right. But this is really a matter of just laying down a base color so it's not just working white into white like that. Excuse me. And because we're using glazing liquid for a lot of these upper layers, when we start doing that and start glazing with our colors, anything that's underneath as an underlying color will show through a little bit, but not a ton. So maybe if you're using, for example, our sort of cool grays for the upper layer of rocks, maybe you want to work in some reds to kind of balance those colors out. Again, we're keeping our paint pretty thin here. Probably, even this at this point is probably a little too thick. I want to get it super transparent. Again, we're avoiding the grout lines. We're not. It's okay if you cover them up a little bit. Again, we have a paint marker. We can always go over again. And I know this looks really strange. It doesn't look like bricks because the colors are all wrong. Again, it's not going to be the final color. And you'll see at the very end of this, if you see any of this base color still left, then that would be probably really surprising. Also, forgot to mention I may be using a liner brush as well today. Not sure. It's going to depend on how things go. And I know a lot of you will probably be tempted to use a larger brush for this technique. Don't. Honestly, the best thing you can do for yourself is to take your time, use a smaller brush, and make sure you don't lose out on any of the really cool details you're going to get from doing a technique like this. We're just going to kind of more or less fade out these edge bricks. Not a big deal. Okay, right about like that. And one of the reasons why we use a washer layer is mostly so the paint dries relatively quick. So at this point, I'm just going to pull out any areas that I see are wetter. So we don't want the color so much to blend in as much as to be that underlying base coat. That looks a little bit better. Okay. Now, at this point, actually have in my notes to build a new palette, but we've already built our palette. I think that my initial goal was to, again, use the high flows, and that tends to spread things out. So if that did happen for you, grab a new palette, start again. But at this point, now we're going to be jumping into our white, black, and gray mixtures. The titanium buff is actually just a finishing color. Probably don't actually need it, but I'll show you how effective it'll be for us in the long run. So at this point, we are going to grab our glazing liquid. And a lot of people are like, oh, just use a couple of drops. No. That's not how I use glazing liquid. I grab a whole crap load of stuff, and I mix into it. I don't put the glazing liquid into the colors and make them more fluid. I mix into the glazing liquid and use it as a glaze. So at this point, we're going to be basically building our base grays. So for this, I'm going to get a little bit of the gray off to the side here. I have a little bit of dampness in the brush, not a big deal. I'm going to pull in some of the gray to thin it out and keep our flow going and keep things relatively simple. Now at this point, we can kind of be a little more precise, but again, we're not going over those lines. Keep telling yourself not to go over those sketch lines. Now at this point, when you're sort of forming the general shape of the brick, or I should say the block, it's not really a brick. Bricks tend to have a more uniform shape. These are going to be a little more shaky, sort of as if they've been out in the world a lot longer. So they're going to have rougher edges that we're going to eventually sort of work on a little bit. And as you can see, I'm really just covering up that base color. Again, not seeing really much of any of it. And the base color is really just there, again, to act as a little bit of a buffer layer between the stark white and the grays of the bricks as well. If you're using a more transparent gray or even more glazing liquid, again, you're going to see a lot more of that underlying color. And that, again, that's going to be up to you whether or not you want to show more of the underlying color or less. But don't be afraid to get more paint too. This is one of those things where it's like if you see it starting to kind of pull too much or drag, particularly on a lot of the edges, you want a nice clean line. So grab more paint. Keep dipping back and getting more. And again, to some degree, we're going to be covering our edges back up again in a bit, but. I'm going to grab a tiny bit of water here. Just a little dunk that was. Really looking for that nice clean edge. And I'm really kind of rounding the corners off as well again. It's up to you whether or not you want to make your bricks cleaner in lines or you want to kind of work with their edges a bit more. And make them a little more rigid. And there's all kind of little techniques you can do to keep your hand a little more steady. One thing I actually do a lot is to sort of balance my left hand on with my right like that, just to kind of take any extra shakes out of my hand. Actually, if you guys saw, I think it was one of the recent How to Be an Artist videos. I talk about embracing and using your limitations to your advantage. As well as sort of knowing your own limitations. And one of mine is that my right hand, it's actually pretty bad today. It shakes considerably. So it's really hard for me to keep a steady hand, especially without using my left hand to balance. Now that can certainly be used for some decent techniques to kind of keep a more varied line and get a little bit of that wobble, but for precise stuff, architectural stuff, it's a real pain in the butt. So. All right. Looks pretty good. Okay, so now we're going to work with our grout lines. Now, if you started with a darker paint marker, I used gray, so they're just kind of there a little bit. If you started with a big black Sharpie or even a black paint marker, your grout lines might be a little easier to do, depending on how much you really want to work with them. But for this, we're just going to go ahead and grab our smaller flat and mix up a slightly thinner black. And really, it's your choice what you want to do with your bricks. If you're having darker colored bricks, it's usually better to have a lighter grout. If you're doing lighter colored bricks, which is what we're going to be doing today, it's better to have a darker grout. And that's really just to kind of keep the viewer's attention focused where it should be, as well as just making it look little more visually appealing. If the grout and the bricks are the same color, tend to be like, is that a brick wall? Is it just a concrete wall? I'm not sure. So making that distinction specifically to, again, make that distinction and be able to, tell the viewer exactly what the thing is that you're painting. So, thin black paint, and I'm just going to kind of come in and build my grout lines. Now, at this point where we were very careful not to touch the grout lines, I want to be more careful not to touch the shape of the bricks. I want to keep those relatively intact, so I can kind of work with that a little bit and kind of just fill in any space that I was like, okay, I needed this to be maybe a little rounder, so maybe I won't paint more of that grout. Maybe that's where that brick kind of sits in. And this is why we use a nice small flat or bright, whatever you have, is to really kind of keep a flow to the paint, as well as because you're getting those shapes. You're getting that flat shape and this sideways sort of flat shape. If you're using a round, it makes it a little bit more difficult. And you guys know me, if you've seen my videos before, I use liner brushes a lot, and liner brushes are really just small rounds. So at this point in time, a round or a small round like a liner would actually be a disadvantage. So you really want to work with the flats and the brights that you've got. Maybe if you're using a red brick, you'll want to use like a more of a gray, like this kind of gray as a grout. A white brick, maybe want to look at a brown or a red grout. So go, and it's not just, I'm not just really just making this stuff up. Like go around and see stuff. I mean, walk around neighborhood, look for houses that are made of brick, and look at what color the grout is. Really kind of observe your environment, observe what the thing is that you want to paint. Or at the very least, just Google image search. Just go on and say brick walls. And just look at 200 pictures of brick walls and see how everything looks. And you think, okay, what do I want to do with my brick wall? How do I want to make that work in my particular painting? And it's really up to you. What do you want to do? The technique is here. Your choice of colors and how you present them, whether that's again the face-on brick wall or something with more perspective. And again, the tendency is going to be to grab a nice big giant brush and just brick. But you use a smaller brush. You take your time. Not only do you get a more complex area of color, but you get a more detailed and more interesting to look at painting. Get the water there. We're starting to get a little dry. Actually, my heavy body black has been sitting so long. I have a jar of it that I'm actually starting to. It's actually starting to dry a little bit into the jar, and it's getting thicker than it should be. So I've been having a little trouble reactivating it lately. Which is why I'm moving back to a tube in the future. Actually, I bought a tube, but I'm not going to need it for a little while. Been so much more sparing with a lot of my heavy body colors, but in a good way. I had a lot of time where it was just like, let's use a ton of color on the canvas, and now I'm really kind of moving towards using underpaintings and glazes a lot more. And it's like, wow, this is really effective. And that's actually what this technique is it's very much an underpainting and an overglaze. And then working, when we do work with our heavy body colors, when we do work a lot thicker, it's going to be about adding detail at that point. And even then, we're probably still going to be thinning with water regardless. Okay, so we're almost done with these grout lines. Just got a couple more to drop in. And could I have used a paint marker for this? Probably. Um, but I really wanted the control of a brush for this. And again, we're taking it slow. We're not jumping ahead too much. A lot of tutorials I'm rushing through, but this one I can really taking my time here. And honestly, I like doing this. This is a very fun technique. You guys can't see it on camera right now because everything's pointing down, but I actually have a huge smile on my face while I'm doing this. It's actually starting to make my face hurt. I'm smiling so much. Okay, so those are our grout lines. Now at this point, if you have not done so already, you kind of want to pick your light source. That's something people tend to forget about, especially with something as simple as this. So, in my initial demo that you guys didn't see, it was more of a practice run, I had my light coming from the upper right. And that kind of works really well for a variety of techniques. Personally, I like strong, dominant light sources. So I'm actually going to go ahead and stick with that. So I do this symbol. It's a circle with like an equal sign and an arrow. I'm not sure which artist I picked that up from, but I know I picked it up from some artist. I think it was some video I was watching here on YouTube. I have no idea where it came from, but that's what that little symbol means. If you guys ever see that in my work. So our light's coming from the upper right. I mean, all of our shadows are going to fall to the left and sort of underneath. So it'll be upper corner. So this edge will be highlighted. This edge will be shadowed, which makes it a little bit easier for us. If you're doing front-facing light, and I'll mention this a couple times as I'm working, but if you're doing front-facing light, the light sort of will be in the center of the brick, and then it'll sort of fade out to the shadow on all edges. So again, so it'll be like light in the center and then just fade out to the black in the edges, which is going to make more sense as I start going. So the first thing you want to do for building in sort of your lights or your shadows is you want to go in whatever direction the grout lines are, so probably darker. So we're going to have our gray, which we've been using, with a little bit of the glazing liquid. And I'm going to add a bit of the black to it and just kind of darken it. We're not going all the way black. We're not taking it all the way to the same color as the grout line, but we are getting close. I'm really used to using my high flows for this. This is suddenly a little more difficult than I'm used to. Okay. And this bigger bright that we were using before, we're probably not going to touch that again. We're just exclusively using this smaller flat. So light's coming from the upper left. All of our shadows are going to be on the right. So we're just going to follow the contour of the brick and get really close to that edge. I'm actually going to wipe a lot of this paint away. I don't need a ton of it. And then we're going to just use that darker color and blend it real lightly into the rest of the brick. I'm actually going to get a little bit more black here. And this is where the glazing liquid is going to come in handy, because getting this soft, subtle blend from brick to brick to brick is going to be really, really nice. I don't need a ton over here since we didn't finish that edge. And you can kind of go over the brick line a little bit. You can go into the grout line a little if you feel so inclined. I'm going to probably do that on a couple of these. I'm actually realizing now that I did not use enough glazing liquid in my initial base color for these bricks. A large portion of this technique for it to work well is, one, not to do a whole bunch at once, is to do maybe like 6 bricks at a time rather than a dozen. So that's partially my own fault for getting a little too far ahead here. But I wanted the demo to be a decent size for you guys. So if I was doing this on a regular painting, I wouldn't do probably more than 2 rows at a time. And then I'd just remix my color and go again, which is why using gray is really effective for this and easy, because you're only using 3 colors. If you're using like 6 colors, being able to remix from brick to brick is a little more irritating. But you would get in then that little bit of a variation that you might see out of like a red brick wall, because a lot of red brick walls have a lot of like there's a few darker red ones and a few oranger ones in the wall, so it'll feel a little bit more natural that way. Of you just kind of being like, crap, what colors was I using? Or if you're just using 3 colors, a lot of that stays a little more consistent. So the shadow layer, if you haven't been able to notice it yet, that's okay. I'm kind of noticing myself that it's not showing up super well, and especially on camera, but it's going to make more of a difference once we get to the light layer. And you can kind of work in either direction, dark to light or light to dark. For a lot of mediums like graphite or charcoal, you have to work from light to dark, unless you want to start erasing like crazy. But one thing that's great about acrylic is you can work actually in either direction. In a lot of my work and a lot of my paintings, I'm actually working from dark to light. I'm establishing a dark base color and building light on top of that. And again, that doesn't really matter, but personally, I find it a little bit easier to work dark to light. And again, this is just with acrylic. Other mediums, you don't have the luxury of being able to do that. So it tends to be a little harder to work with that way. I'm way too used to the high flows now, because mixing with these heavier blacks, I'm actually struggling to get a little bit of a blend. Oh, and I probably should have mentioned this earlier. This is making more of a difference with our first sort of dark layer. You don't necessarily just have to go horizontal. Because you're using a flat brush, you can kind of do more horizontal and vertical strokes, and adding that little extra difference in stroke, 1, helps blend out the color a little more, and 2, really kind of gives you just that extra bit of, I would say, maybe finesse with the bricks, so it's not just color, color, color. It doesn't look flat. Giving yourself a little extra direction with the brush stroke that you've got adds a little more complexity and detail to the piece in ways that you may not realize at first. It's a little dry here. I'm using these darks kind of, I wouldn't say super sparingly, but again, it kind of depends on your light source and where you want to build things in. And again, these are going to be light bricks. They're not going to be, they look, everything looks really dark and relatively miserable, I'd say, right now. It's actually a lot like the weather outside my house right now. It's raining and cloudy and dark. So we're going to need to bring some light into these bricks and brighten up the day. Okay, that's pretty good. And actually, these lower ones are really just going to be mostly getting that highlight layer. So I'm just going to be adding a tiny little bit on the bottom of these. The back of them I'll need to hit. That one not so much, but the back of these ones. Okay, so I know that, again, this doesn't look like much right now, but immediately, as soon as we put these highlights in, this is why I love doing dark to light, because the highlights just make everything go boom, and they pop up, and everything's great. All right, so mix a little gray here. I'm going to grab a big scoop of this and move it over here. Then we got our white. White's a little more potent of a color, a little higher tint strength. It'll be easier for us to get that lighter color. White, glazing liquid. And a lot of times in my painting, I'm doing like a mid-tone highlight and then another highlight on top of that. I'm going to do something sort of similar today, but you could kind of do like 2-3 different highlight layers, depending on how much you really want to push your detail. But I'm going to stick with, I think, just 2 today to keep things relatively simple. Okay, so I built up the color, pulling a lot of it away, not quite to the level of dry brushing, but we're getting there. We're leaning to less paint on the brush, but it's a thinner paint because of the glazing liquid and the bit of water we're adding. So I'm going to start with one of these middle bricks that actually kind of has a corner, and then I'll work my way out and around. So we're pulling that corner. Actually, I do have to get a little more white into this. I'm never sure. It's always like, oh yeah, that's light enough. And then it's like, nope, definitely need more. Also, I suppose the glaze kind of comes into it as a factor as well. So we're going to be picking up some underlying color. So there's our edge. And at this point, you probably don't want to go over your edge. This is especially with the lights. This is where it's going to matter whether or not you kind of stick with that edge. Okay, pull this paint away and off. So now that we've kind of dropped that paint in, we can kind of pull it with what we've got, wiping away, and now we can kind of dry brush with it. Just work with it. And again, I don't want to angle. I don't want to do this. I don't want to make circles. I just want to go vertical and horizontal to keep with the shape of the brick. Vertical. Horizontal pulls it out. Vertical blends it. Like so. And one thing that I'm going to say is very easy to do here, and it's something that I know a lot of you will probably struggle with the first few times you do this technique, is you'll want to overblend it. You want to turn this into a super soft gradient. Don't do it. For the love of God, don't do it. Because you will lose all of that detail, all of that little bit of variation that we built up over time. As soon as you start trying to overblend that, it's like, nope, just step back, couple of strokes, then leave it alone. That is something that I find a lot of artists struggle with, is just over blending their colors. Now with oils, it's a slightly different story. You can do more stuff with that, but acrylics are all about layers. So if you're not really utilizing your layers, then you're totally losing the best part of acrylics. So establish your light, blend out, horizontal, vertical, and then don't touch it. It's done. That's it. Very, very easy to lose sight of that. If you're over blending, very soon your colors will either look muddy, or they just look boring. They look like out of the tube colors. And there's a lot of artists that are a big opponent to just straight out of the tube color. I'm both one of them and not one of them. I think it depends highly on the application of the paint and what you're doing with the piece. But I do find that a lot of people blend their colors too much, and when at the point once you blend your colors too much, it just looks like the color came out of the tube and you didn't do anything with it. It's like, oh, I just applied it with a brush. Like, well, that's just applying it with a brush isn't really the heart of painting. The heart of painting is really being able to take your time with it and go slower and to get a little bit of a blend, but again, don't overwork it. And at this point, if your paint's getting a little too tacky, which mine is, you can go into the glazing liquid instead of the water to maintain the fluidity of the paint. I just wiped that on my pants. I wanted to get that a little bit drier. And that is something that I need to get better at telling you is when I wipe the paint off. Let me get a rag here, because I instinctively go right to my pants instead of to a rag, just because that's how I've been painting forever. So yeah, very simple, easy little glazing liquid. Little paint. Get the lighter edge of the brick in. I'm going to do a 2 here. Wipe it. Pull. And this is at this point where I'm kind of doing sort of apply paint and then dry brush it. This idea is very much why we use canvas rather than wood, because this little bit of a drag that I'm getting here from this is all the texture of the canvas. This has nothing to do with the brush. This has nothing to do with the paint. So if you're trying to do this on wood and you're not getting, or even paper, I would say, and you're not getting that little bit of a drag, and you're like, well, why doesn't it look the way that Ben's doing it, it's because I'm working on canvas. That it's the one thing that really kind of does make a bit of a difference when working. So if you're going to be doing a dry brush technique and you want a little more texture in your painting, use canvas. That's one of the big advantages of it. Not a lot of color at all left on this brick. Okay, now we're into the main section again. We did all this top one, so I'm gonna get thinner paint here. Yeah, all of this underneath is that initial gray. At this point, it's pretty much dry. So the blending we're getting is between our dark layer on the right and the light layer on the left, and we're really just kind of bringing those two together. And if you notice, again at this point, that initial kind of brown, blue, red, yellow base color we started with, short of some edge stuff here, you don't even see it anymore. So again, with using those primaries at the beginning, when I said you can use whatever colors you want, again, you can use whatever colors you want. It does not matter. You can use purple and green and orange and fuchsia and fluorescent, doesn't matter. You're going to cover it up. It's really just there to act as a guideline. It's not a rule. We figured they were more like guidelines. Little pirate's humor for you there. I gotta watch that movie again. That was fun. The original, not the newer ones. The newer ones are, you know, meh. But still. Gonna do a good rinse right now. Programming a little glaze and going again. So I want to apologize in advance here. I know this one's running a little long, but that's sort of the heart of this technique is that while, yes, it does take a while, the effect is so worth it. It's just like, wow, that was so great. You know, when you take your time and really kind of work on getting some great color in your painting, and it's like, yes, awesome, perfect. You know, I've said it like 6 times already, but I'm gonna say it again. Put the big brushes down. Use small ones. Use smaller brushes. This is about a little bigger than the size of my hand here in terms of space. So we're really looking at a simple, fairly simple, easy layering technique here. But if you're trying to use too big of a brush, you're gonna lose sight of that real fast. You're not gonna have that. I went back to my gray because I gotta re-wet some stuff here. Get a little extra color in there. Yeah, if you're to the point where you have to re-wet the center gray, then you're definitely working in too large of an area. And now I'm way too thin. I'm way too thin now. I got that pooling effect. I'm like, nope. Not what I'm looking for there. Alright. So we're just about through here. So this is sort of I would say the end of the main part of this tutorial. So if you want to go ahead and stop watching now, feel free. This is sort of what we've established. This is how to create a nice brick wall. I'm going to do 2 more techniques with this though, because again, if you guys watched my videos before, you know that I like to take it just the extra mile to give yourself a little extra fun to everything. Also, if you noticed, I haven't touched the titanium buff yet. That's what we're going to be doing next. So this gets you the base of this technique. If you want to just take it further on your own, feel free. But if you want to stick around and find 2 ways to really kind of take this technique to the next level, so stick around in just a few minutes here. All right, I'll move this rag over. Okay, so the titanium buff, we haven't touched it yet. This is where I'm actually going to go ahead and grab my liner brush, the one I said I probably wasn't going to use in this video, but I'm going to anyway. So this is straight out of the tube titanium buff. I'm not even going to touch the other stuff. I'm just going to use this. And again, like I mentioned before, it's kind of hit and miss. It's based on technique, whether or not you want to use straight out of the tube color. Because I'm using the liner brush, which sort of at its core kind of means that I'm going to be using it very sparingly. This is going to add the perfect little highlight on the edge of a handful of these rocks. Probably not every single one of them. You gotta be really careful with this stuff, though, because it is potent. And the titanium buff, rather than just titanium white, is going to be sort of diffusing light a little bit. If you're using just titanium white, it can look a little bit more like snow. If you use the buff, it'll have a little bit more, because it has a little, almost like a yellow kind of color to it. So it kind of creates a slightly more natural light look. So any edge that I really just want to define a little bit more, I can use this with. And still focusing on horizontal and vertical strokes. I'll put one here. At least for the most part, I do want to round the corners out slightly. Here. Little finger blending. Like this was a higher concentration of that gray. So if I get a little extra white into it, or at least this white, differentiates things a little bit more. Say a higher concentration of it here, I can build a little more in this section. A bit more here. Here. Again, really minimal uses of these lines. Like so. Again, just a couple tiny little indications of really nice, simple little lines. Can really make that big of a difference. Now again, these techniques are extra. They involve things that you may not necessarily need, but there are a handful of things that make things a little bit more interesting. So I didn't mention this stuff before, and I'm not going to say you need it by any means. This is absolutely a special effect color/medium. This is Golden's micaceous iron oxide. It dries and has a little bit of a metallic sheen to a finish, and it basically sits in like a carbon black paint color. So it has little mica flakes in it that kind of catch and reflect light. Now I'm going to grab just a hint of this onto my palette. Tiny little bit. Again, absolutely in special effect territory now. You don't have to do this. If you're watching to this point and you're like, wow, that looks cool, feel free to try it. But again, if you're just painting a brick like this, you can absolutely stop right here. Just stop right here. But of course, because it's me, you got to take it the extra mile. So I'm just going to glaze with some of this stuff. And in a few areas, sort of where that light and the dark meet, I'm going to put this stuff. And adds the illusion that these bricks maybe have metallic components to them. Maybe they're like an iron ore that somebody carved blocks into, or they have some sort of a mineral base that's within them. Or maybe it's just maybe they're just wet and you know light from the sun is just catching the brick a little, like so. So again, a couple little extra techniques, kind of take the technique a little bit for the technique and the style and the shapes and the colors of your bricks a little bit further, to really kind of create something that is truly a spectacular way to paint bricks.
So I know this one ran a little bit long, but these big tutorials usually seem to. I think it's a great technique. I think it can be applied to a lot of different kinds of painting, and I hope you guys really learned something. If you did, hit the like button. Consider supporting me on Patreon to get some cool stuff. Get subscribed if you're not already. And this has been Cinderblock Studios. See you guys next time.